And I want to welcome you. We are going to start. And I want to say I really loved how people showed up in our first session. I just really felt your presence, and it was very encouraging. So I'm back, and I'm glad you are too. I want to just emphasize again the really vital importance of staying muted unless you're speaking. I edited out some of the dog bark and other things from our first video, but it really doesn't take very much to be distracted. So it's *6 if you happen to be on a phone, to mute or unmute. And I'm not gonna be unmuting everyone this time around. I think I'll just let you be responsible for that. And again, I don't intend to look at the chat. If you want to post things there, you're welcome to. I'll see it after the session, but for me, it would just be more of a distraction than anything else. And there will be an opportunity for questions and hopefully a breakout group. I see the breakout option right where it's supposed to be this time around. I did have to go in and change a setting. No big deal. In those periods for questions, just unmute yourself to ask a question. And again, the Google Doc is going to be a good place to really unpack the questions, and they're starting to roll in, and I really appreciate engagement there. I think that'll be a good place for it. So with that, I want to just invite us to really settle in. Let your breath support you in letting the thoughts go. Close your eyes if that feels okay. Connecting with your body. The support of the earth. And tune in once again to the longing that brings you here to these sessions. And notice this basic ability to put your attention on that longing, or on your breath, or anywhere you want. That really basic capacity to take control of your attention. And in this moment, very consciously putting your attention on the longing that brings you here to these sessions. And relate to this longing and your ability and your willingness to put your attention there as an offering of yourself to this moment. Not a focusing, not a commitment, not an intention, but an offering of yourself to this moment. And notice if that brings a different flavor, perhaps more open-heartedness, more heart-centeredness. When you truly give yourself to the moment, you align with life itself, with the mystery that you're embedded in, with all its paradox, all its potential. So just feel your willingness, your ability to offer yourself fully to this moment and to align with life. Honor it. And let this energy of self-offering anchor you in our session tonight. Thank you. So I want to say a little more about my personal experience with restorative justice, because I think it helps clarify why I structure the webinar the way I do, with its early emphasis on the worldview and love and the heart. And so when I started my exploration of root causes and root solutions to our insanity, our collective predicament about 15 years ago, I really dove in deep, quick, and I didn't have a lot of capacity. I was pretty green in that way. I had no mindfulness, no meditation, no psychotherapy, none of that. No nonviolent communication. And I moved from Nova Scotia to Boulder to dive in to a year-long peacemaker training with a fellow named Fleet Mall. Some of you will know Fleet personally or know of him. Those of you with the Shambhala community, Fleet is a senior student of Chogyam Trungpa, was a senior student of Chogyam Trungpa, who was the first person who brought Tibetan Buddhism to the West, my understanding. Also a Zen priest in the tradition of the Zen peacemakers with Bernie Glassman. And Fleet honed his presence in the hot fire of a 14-year prison sentence, meditating in a mop closet and starting 2 organizations while he was in prison, Prison Hospice Institute and the Prison Dharma Institute, bringing mindfulness and other mindfulness-based resources into prisons. Very powerful guy. So here I am, really green, and Fleet starts just laying down all these teachings, all these practices, mindfulness, meditation, interpersonal skills, group facilitation. And I did my best to pick up everything he was throwing down. And I was taking in a lot of other stuff too, reading voraciously. And so it was a lot that was needing integrating. And in Nova Scotia, before moving to Boulder, no Shambhala connection there for me, really, by the way, for you Shambhala folks. I did know a few people, but I wasn't a part of that community. I'd started hearing about restorative justice. So I moved to Boulder and I'm hearing more about restorative justice, and Fleet recommends it to me. So I think, okay, I'll try that. I'll add that into the mix. And I thought it would just be another thing, you know, another piece of the puzzle for me. But it really turned out to be so much more. I really realized that it was a way of life, that it required a different worldview. And it was a way for me to integrate and put into practice so much of what I was learning. And in the mix, I also realized that that love was really core to that worldview. And that from that ground, I started to feel clarity and courage and compassion that I hadn't known before. So that worldview that's relational, that's restorative, I just found it so 180 degrees opposed to the worldview I was recovering from, you know, the dominant paradigm. And so I just wanted to share that personal experience with it. It's why I structure this the way I do. So I'm going to go find my PowerPoint. Okay. Want to move this down or maybe over. Okay, let's try that. So, session 2, 5 foundations of healing justice, our deep dive into the 5 R's. And I want to start with a question that we started with last time. How will the restorative justice worldview live in you? Because this is what's key. How are you going to orient around this? How are you going to live it? How will you continue to deepen your clarity, courage, and compassion? And when in doubt, when challenged, what is your ground? I need to make sure I'm still recording. Hang on a second here. And I emphasize that worldview of restorative justice and its spiritual dimensions and its depth, because I feel like to do healing justice, we need the kind of courage that the freedom riders exemplified. This is a photo of the freedom riders. Right? We may not face fire hoses and billy clubs and police dogs doing active peace circles, but if we choose challenging issues, we'll be challenged. It's inherent in the process, which is so out of the box. You know, it's such a new paradigm. So I just underscore that yet again. The importance of those spiritual dimensions, the transpersonal dimensions of the restorative justice worldview. And apropos foundations, here's another one. Humankind survival depends on our ability to stop rushing. No matter what else happens in the world in terms of social change, social justice. If we don't stop rushing, we're not going to survive. And so I think this can support us in healing justice, in taking those breaths as facilitators, as organizers, as people who want to stay rooted in that worldview. So I offer that as a foundation. And I'm going to introduce the basic stages tonight of active peace circles. And so here's an outline. There's a 2-page document that that goes into more detail on each of these that will be part of the resources for this session. So the restorative mindset, the preparation and enrollment phase, the circle process, implementation, measurement. We want our results to be measurable, quantifiable, and the reintegration phase, right? If we've done our repair, then everyone can reintegrate back into the community without lingering blame, shame, and resentment. So tonight, our focus is the restorative mindset, which dovetails beautifully with our focus on the worldview, the restorative worldview, last session. Session 3 will be preparation and enrollment. Session 4 will be the circle process. And sessions 3 and 4 will be more experiential than our first session and tonight. You will spend more time in small groups, really digging into it. You know, I'll be starting to run out of things to say soon, thankfully, right? And it'll be up to you to really start feeling into it and using the material. So we're going to unpack the restorative mindset tonight. And I want to take questions at the end of this. There will be a time for questions, but because they all go together, sort of like the 5 R's, I think it'll be best to save the questions for the end. So we're all about co-creating a community-driven process grounded in the principles and practices of restorative justice. The process is applicable to any issue where there is sincere interest in hearing the full extent of the harm and healing the harm. And it can also be used proactively to avoid harm. So these principles and practices, right, we're out of the box with healing justice and active peace circles. We're no longer in the criminal justice system. So we can use these principles and practices any way we want. We can use them proactively to avoid harm. Say there's a urban development proposal that looks like a recipe for gentrification. We can come together and we can explore that. Or coming together to address a new fracking well, fracking proposal, or any kind of policy change. So proactively, the 5 R's of restorative justice provide a framework that address the harm fully, encourage accountability, and foster repair and healing without blame, shame, and punishment. We create the conditions that bring out the best in people while keeping the process uncompromisingly honest and real. We address underlying root causes and systems level change as we go. So the whole reason for the process is to create the conditions, the container where people can be honest and real, where the harm can be revealed and repaired. So it's really And there really is an uncompromising aspect to it. And we address the underlying root causes and systems change as we go. So we're not just about healing the immediate harm, but we want to look at the underlying causes. So we can think about, as examples, excessive police violence against people of color. Obviously, there are systemic issues there that contribute to that. There's beliefs, there's assumptions, and we want to unpack that in this process. Organizational cultures that allow or even condone sexual violence. There are obviously underlying organizational structures that need to be addressed if we're going to break the cycle. And we want to break the cycles of violence and harm in this process. We know that a lot of victims, more than anything, they want to know that what happened to them won't happen to anybody else. They want that more than punishment. They want that more than their own personal restoration. They want the cycle broken. This is a way we can do that. So we come together across divisions to strengthen the community and bring about fundamental changes in thinking, behavior, and relationships. Since our efforts are aimed at deep level healing and transformation, we build the processes needed for ongoing dialogue, accountability, and relationship building. So here's all 5 of those. And I want to pause here and see if there's any questions that arise out of this. The next thing we're going to do, FYI, is we're going to do our deep dive into the 5 R's. But just in terms of creating this restorative mindset, the 5 R's are pivotal here. You see in point number 2, they're right there holding the process together. But any other questions that come up around just this is still the worldview, the mindset portion of the process. Just unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. Otherwise, we'll just move on into the 5 R's.
I have a question.
Please.
You're assuming that there's a sincere interest in hearing the full extent of the harm and healing the harm.
I am. What was the last part that you said?
I'm reading what you say.
Yeah.
It's applicable to any issue where there is a sincere interest in hearing the full extent of the harm and healing the harm.
Yes.
When you talk about those police situations and the sexual harassment, I question whether there is a sincere interest in hearing the full extent of the harm and healing the harm. So how do you address situations when you don't have that sincere interest in healing?
Yeah, well, great question. Obviously, we have to question that, especially in the beginning. This is what we are going to uncover in the early stages of the process. The preparation and enrollment phase, next session. We have to determine if there is that sincere interest. And if there's maybe the potential for it, if it can be coached out more fully, if it can be encouraged in any way, emphasizing that this is a process that's not based on blame and shame and punishment. But yes, we're gonna have to figure that out. We're gonna have to be really honest with ourselves. And a lot of times we won't go any further. right? Because there won't be that interest. There won't be the ability to uphold the 5 R's: respect, responsibility. So it sets a high bar for sure. And this is a big part of the transformational potential too.
I mean, it depends on who you ask, right? Who's willing to hear the harm and heal the harm.
Absolutely. It'll be totally dependent on the situation and the people involved and how it's presented. And so that's why this piece for you all as leaders, forget about the other people that you're going to talk to about it. You all as leaders really need to be rooted in this, because you're the ones who are going to be explaining it to other people and how it's different, why it's different.
Scott, I'd love
Yes.
for, at some point, when you say build processes in number 5, build processes for ongoing dialogue, etc., I hope that we will cover that at some point.
You know, I hope we can touch on that. Again, it's really going to depend on the specifics of the issue. But I think it points to just the need to keep it going in whatever way we can. It'll take a lot of creativity and, you know, maybe some funding and buy-in. So yeah, thank you. Maybe time for one more, Dennis.
So what we're saying, I mean, you know, if someone is harmed, often they're the ones who are going to be aware of the harm that's done. And whether it's an institution or someone else who caused the harm or was part of it, they're not going to necessarily want to deal with it. So is what you're saying then that our role would be to find the creative way to put all this on the table?
Yes. Yes. And, you know, people who cause harm, they will have some sense of it. You know, if they claim to have no, what I said in the first session is that some initial responsibility taking is required to get off the ground at all. But it doesn't have to be complete responsibility, because we really won't know that until we have the circle and we really hear the full extent of the harm from all of the people in the circle. And we include all the ripple effects in that too, the ways the community has been affected. So there's lots of harm that we will just simply not know unless people come together in a process like this. So these are the pivotal questions, and I'm really happy you're asking them. And this is the answer. You know, this is sort of, you know, between the 5 R's and this restorative mindset, which I hope outlines really broadly what this is. And again, a sincere interest in hearing the full extent of the harm. It can't be a pretend interest. That won't fly. And it's our job as leaders, as facilitators, to call that out. And there's lots of preparation that goes into it. So there's the opportunity for people to vent their frustrations. That's next session. Preparation and enrollment. So great. I'll look for more questions in the Google Doc too, on this, because I'm sure there probably are more. But we're going to dive into the 5 R's, and we'll take questions after this section too, because these all go together. but we're gonna really start to dive into this. So it's not just these 5 R's as principles, but there's questions. There's a process that flows from them. And that's true in restorative justice. And I feel like what I've done with the active peace circle model is expand it somewhat and deepen it. And all of the questions that follow are in that excerpt from my book that I encouraged you to read in the context of the BP oil spill. And I think all these questions will be relevant to a full range of issues. And there may be minor variations depending on the issue, but from my perspective, these are the questions that really flow. Is respect being shown to all involved? Are those involved showing self-respect? What is limiting respect? Can we work with that? What support is needed to encourage more respect? So there's the respect in the circle. There's also the respect in the preparation phase. How are people showing up in the initial conversations? Are they being respectful? That's going to tell us if restorative justice is even a possibility. We look for green lights, we look for red flags. And how much coaching, how much work does it appear to be to try to coach somebody, not convince them to do something they are just not inclined to do or not capable to do, but we can offer some coaching. And respect is total, right? So in the circle, it includes body language, it includes facial expressions. It's taken very seriously, and people need to know that up front. We're not messing around here. And as a supporter of this process, as a facilitator of it, you get to model all of this. Show people what it looks like. Come grounded in that worldview and live it, and inspire them to step up to the plate. And so why self-respect? That's not usually a part of restorative justice in my experience. But here, because we're going for a deeper level of transformation and healing, people need to show up fully. And so self-respect is a part of that. Responsibility, the next R. And here's where I put a lot of the really meaty questions. But remember, it's all of the R's that hold the process. But we have to unpack, what happened, what is the harm, who is responsible, why did this happen, what's the context, what contributed at the systems level, at the organizational level. How do the people responsible feel about their actions now? So without respect, we're not going to get into a circle. There won't be any healing justice. And it's the same with responsibility. So we can start to imagine people sitting in a circle, looking each other in the eye, speaking from their own experience, no finger pointing. And we can start to imagine situations where the responsibility isn't so black and white as it is in a lot of restorative justice cases in the criminal justice system, where there's an obvious party or parties who caused the harm, and there are people impacted by the harm. Here we can start to imagine situations where maybe the power is not as unbalanced as it sometimes is, dysfunction in a group where responsibility is shared, people coming together to address climate change. And we can ask what is needed to encourage more responsibility. And we can meet the needs in the circle. You know, what do people really need in this specific case? And can we bring that forward? And we can also ask a question like, how did others possibly participate in causing the harm, contribute to the harm, condone it, allow it? The third R, relationship. How have interpersonal, economic, ecological, and social relationships been damaged? Why are these relationships important? Are interpersonal relationships being prioritized? Who needs to be involved as support for those harmed and those responsible for the harm so that everyone can participate fully, right? Everyone shows up in the circle with the support they need, the person or the people that can help them show up fully. So we really want to unpack all of the ripple effects of the harm. And a lot of those ripple effects are going to show up in the relationships, the family relationships. And we want to bring that forward because this is where a lot of the harm lies. And this is where interbeing and the restorative justice worldview really provide basic support for, particularly for you as a leader. Relationship here means prioritizing the relationships in the circle of the parties above everything else. And that doesn't mean being wishy-washy or not standing up for the needs, your needs or other people's needs, but seeing through the egocentric to the way that our needs are universal and they're either met together or not at all in a lot of situations. So I want just these first 3 R's. I just want to step back and just ask you to see if you can appreciate how they go together, how they support each other. Respect, responsibility, relationship. Just those 3. And then we come to repair. What does repair, healing of the harm entail in this situation? What has already been done to repair the harm? Have the ripple effects been addressed? Has the relationship harm been addressed? What systems level changes need to be made? If more needs to be done to repair the harm, what specific actions are required? How can a process of repair and healing be sustained over time? What structures need to be in place? What additional support, psychological, spiritual, financial, social, cultural, is needed? What are the options for moving forward? Can there be a consensus on an action plan? So, And reintegration, 5th R. Do those harmed feel fully restored? Are they able to reintegrate back into the community without lingering blame, shame, and resentment directed at those responsible for the harm? Are those who caused the harm willing and able to reintegrate back into society, back into the organization without feeling shame and resentment? To the extent that the answer to any of these questions is no, the harm has not been fully repaired, what more needs to happen to get to yes? So that's kind of a lot. Let's just take a moment and just feel what's in your heart around this right now. What's alive? And I want to pause here for questions, key takeaways. Just unmute yourself if you want to share something, ask a question.
I have something to say, Scott.
Donna.
So, a lot of the people that I've dealt with over the 15 years have been young people. They're not mature. They don't look you in the eye. They want to take responsibility. Their parents really want them to. They show up. They do a pretty good job. Some are amazing. Others, I leave and I think, oh Lord, please help us. Because they have to go home with those parents? Or did they really get it? Because part of it is we don't have enough follow through. Some of these people could be in therapy for a few years, I don't know. So sometimes I feel like we're all a little fragile. I hope it opens their eyes, their ears, their hearts. There's a lot of family dynamics that need to be addressed that can't be part of our circle. So sometimes I just feel like, wow, there's so much work to be done. And it leaves me feeling a little bad, much less the people. So I wonder how that fits into the whole big picture.
Yeah. Thank you, Donna.
Thanks.
I so honor your 15 years of experience
Thank you.
working, doing restorative justice with the Boulder County Sheriff's Office. So this is part of the beauty of a community-led process. We don't have some of the same limitations around time. And I'm reminded of, I have this vision that healing justice really starts to bring us full circle back to the indigenous roots of restorative justice, where it wasn't limited to one circle, where the whole community really could be involved, where they tackle generational harm, sexual abuse, various kinds of trauma. And they understand that it could take years, right? There's no artificial limits and timelines. And I feel that way about this process too, that it can be flexible. And it's part of our radical honesty, like what's really needed here. And you raised such a good point about people, particularly young people, showing up as best they can, maybe. Is it what we might want in an ideal world? Probably not. What I will underscore here around that with this process is just that restorative justice started small and built and became popular because people saw how effective it was. I think the same thing can happen with healing justice and this community-led process, but it has to be true to its principles, to its heart, just like restorative justice, right? To be a facilitator, you go through a very good training and you follow a process. And so I feel the same way here, that we do have to hold the bar pretty high. And I envision a lot of these circles as not involving, 14-year-olds, but older folks that we can have higher expectations of. So that's my initial response. Anybody else?
I have a question, Scott.
Jeffrey.
Are there crimes or harm that the restorative model uses outside of responsibility?
Yeah, I'm not hearing you very well. Can you ask that again?
Yeah, are there crimes that the criminal justice system feel are beyond the ability to engage in restorative justice? And my second question is, can you give some examples, some creative examples on how repair can be engaged with or enacted that aren't necessarily intuitive at first blush?
Mm. Thank you. Well, to the first question, I've been out of restorative justice in the criminal justice system for a while. So there's probably other people in the webinar who could answer that first question better than I, and perhaps the Google Doc is the place to do that. One thing that initially jumps out is sexual violence. Restorative justice, it's actually been mandated in Colorado that restorative justice is not going to touch that.
Scott?
Yes?
Hi, it's Debbie. We also don't address any kind of an issue like domestic violence due to the power differential. So anytime there's a crime involved, a felony maybe that where there's a power differential, where a true forgiveness, or not forgiveness, but a true acceptance of responsibility is likely to not be true because of the power differential, we don't take those kinds of cases.
Yeah.
And like you said, the state of Colorado, the RJ conference or folks have said we aren't going to handle those kinds of cases because of that. And we don't have years and years. I love that you talk about, the Aboriginals or the other folks that have years and years to address those kinds of issues. We unfortunately don't.
In the system, yeah.
Right.
Yes. So that's a perfect answer to that first question. I think that's the fear, is there's a power differential, the risks are super high, and we need to be, if we are going to engage in that territory, because this is community initiated and community led, we will want to be very careful to not re-victimize people.
Can I add one more thing?
Re-traumatize people, please.
I would be also very careful if there are any protection orders in place, that we aren't engaging and bringing people together if there's a protection order in place. There's a lot of things you have to do to go to the courts to get permission to meet with folks that have protection orders. So just be careful about that too.
So great. Thank you. And then repair. I think I want to leave that for now, Jeffrey, partly because of time and partly because it's just going to depend so much on the specifics of who's in the circle. There's really no limits. And I will just say, well, hopefully we'll talk more about this, but the people who determine the repair is everybody in the circle together, save the facilitators who are just there to facilitate the process. So those harmed participate in what the repair will be. Those who cause the harm participate in what the repair will be. The community members participate in what the repair will be. And so it needs to be commensurate. It needs to be meaningful. Ideally, it's measurable. And I think I just need to leave it at that. I really want to save the time for the breakaway groups. Great questions. The Google Doc is a place for additional questions. So just to underscore, not about blame, shame, and punishment. So important to remember that. And my sense of this, there's very strong principles, a very strong container, but it's also organic. It also will depend on the specifics that you're working with, the individual people that are involved. And in the Google Doc, I raise a question around safety. And how can we maximize safety, that we will not re-victimize, that we will not re-traumatize, beyond the basic principles that we're going to talk about, beyond the basic practices. You all know things that I certainly don't know. You know, you have experiences that I don't have. You know, how can we do our utmost to make this a safe process? And some of the things mentioned already go into that equation, you know, power differential, really looking seriously at that. So I want to ask just really quickly, what happens when we take the 5 R's and make them principles that you personally live by? Ways that you can hold the high ground when you're challenged, when you're unsure, when you're shaky. I think they work really well. And I think that's such a beautiful thing about the R's. And you'll notice I put responsibility at the top. And that's simply because we may not always be respectful. We may not always prioritize relationships or be in a repair mindset. Personally, I'm talking about us now. But what's the first move if we want to shift that? Right? I think the first move is personal responsibility for coming back to center, for doing what we need to do to get grounded, to get present, to get back to respect, to relationship. So I just wanted to emphasize that, emphasize the personal responsibility and the way these 5 R's really can uphold that. And I used to leave reintegration off of this list, holding the high ground. But putting this webinar together, I realized that is still our litmus test, right? Like if I'm not 100% willing to come back into a relationship with somebody or back into a group setting, there's still more that needs to happen. And so I think it's very valuable as a litmus test, and holding the high ground using these 5 R's help make you a safe space and help make the process that you create a safe process. So let's take a few minutes for any questions that are alive right now, any comments, and then we're going to go into a breakout group.
Scott, I have a kind of a simple beginner's question.
Great.
What would it be appropriate to be both a leader of a circle and also the person who has been harmed?
No. No, what you want in your facilitators are people that are objective, and their only role is to facilitate the circle. So that would not be a good fit. Yeah, short answer. Any other questions, comments alive in the moment?
Scott, there's a question in the chat.
Okay, can you read it to me?
Susan Shea asks, how do you encourage people who have harm to join the process?
Well, that's our next session. That's our next session. This session continues to be about, it's really a lot about you as leaders. Forget about the other people. What I really want to underscore and emphasize in these first two sessions are the foundations for you. Supporting this process, potentially facilitating this process. And so that's the preparation and enrollment phase. And so that's what we're going to really dive into next session.
Scott, I have a question. If you could just say a little bit more about how respect and relationship, how you can hold the high ground in that a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Because it seems like a really deep path. It's just, I'd like to hear a little bit more articulated.
Well, this is just me, how it lives in me. Prioritizing relationship, just that idea, that intention, for me has been, it's a game changer, isn't it? I mean, but it helps us, that frame, and experimenting with it. Okay, well, if I don't prioritize my immediate short-term gratification, my immediate short-term needs, and prioritize this relationship and this other person and their needs, turns out that's a really good way for me to get my needs met, because so many of our needs are relational, right? So it just is a way to live that truth of interbeing and interrelatedness. And respect, unconditional respect, is another game changer. You know, we know about conditional respect. I'll respect you if you respect me, and but holding the high ground with that respect principle, that's more unconditional. And it challenges my ego every time I try to do it. So I grow, I deepen into who I really want to be. So yeah, it is deep. Jessie.
Yeah, I think in general, I'm feeling very, inspired and hopeful about this process, and have really been wanting to dive into it and understand it more thoroughly, more deeply, more fully. And last week, especially so, I just felt that space of the possibility of, working in this intentional and really conscious human conscious range. And tonight I'm feeling much more discouraged. And I guess my question is kind of two-pronged. I'm wondering if you could kind of maybe offer some encouraging scenarios of how you've worked with this and really awful situations, aside from the BP oil spill, which was a good one. But, you know, when it comes, you know, when we're looking at a community where there's been sexual trauma, people in positions of power, rifts of highly intelligent people that are so profoundly deep that the blame and the thought, you know, is, I'm suddenly feeling like maybe this isn't possible in this community, or maybe it isn't. Maybe the safety, you know, valves aren't in place, and maybe the power differentials are too great, and maybe and I know you're talking about the enrollment and buy-in phase. This also dovetails with the earlier questions about the amount of time. Like, you know, when you say endless time, well, a community might not have endless time. I mean, they might, you know, have a year and see where things land and then either fracture apart or not. So it suddenly just became really the nuts and bolts, really the nitty gritty of, you know, maybe this isn't possible in a situation that I'm hoping to work with.
Yeah. Well, Jesse, I appreciate that honesty. And I
But
think
I want
it's,
it to be possible. I want it
and
to be.
I think the healthy stance is somewhere in the middle, right? Some healthy skepticism, some critical thinking, and also some trust, some curiosity, some leaning into the basic goodness of every human being. And we just won't know until we approach people in an informed way. Like, this is what the process is. Not about shame, not about punishment. And again, if we could just hear the full extent of the harm, that alone would shift organizational cultures. And maybe that's as far as we go.
Can I try to address that a little bit?
Sure.
From a point of view of someone that's worked in restorative justice for almost 30 years, there is a lot of hope, Jesse. I mean, we are talking about these huge sexual assault and domestic violence issues is what we addressed today. But I've seen it in schools, I've seen it in neighborhoods, I've seen it in where kids are shoplifting, where people have set barns on fire. I mean, there are serious things where people do come together and they do repair their home. There is absolutely hope. There is absolutely so much good work with the 3 or 4 programs that I'm very familiar with just in Boulder County alone, the City of Boulder, the District Attorney's Office, our program at the Sheriff's Office, Longmont's program. Bev Title started the Longmont program with her 5 Rs. I want to make sure she gets credit for those 5 Rs. But absolutely, from someone, and there's several of my volunteers that are participating in this forum, I think they could address it too and give you hope that there absolutely is great work being done right now, every day in our community. Well, okay, maybe not this minute because of COVID and it's kind of separated us a little bit, but even so, we're still trying to talk with people and trying to help out. So yeah, there is hope.
I appreciate that. And, but I just want to add, I'm not being a doubter. It just suddenly hit me like, oh no, maybe, you know, I'm being naive here, you know, and, but I want it to work.
Yeah. Well, a reframe on the whole naive question is, it's naive to think we can't have a radical transformation like this and survive as a species, you know. And I appreciate everything that was just shared. And I think the Google Doc would be I'd love to hear some hopeful, inspiring examples of particularly the more challenging situations, the better. And Beverly Title was my first mentor in restorative justice. And I credit her with the 5 R's. I'm so happy I trained in Colorado with people like Beverly Title and also the people with the Boulder County Sheriff's Office that I trained with and the collaborative that they had
May
put
I say
together.
one thing, please?
Sure, Donna.
Jesse, this is to you, Jesse. If your community, who I hold in a very high esteem in Boulder, Colorado, you can do this work. This is your work.
I think so.
Yes, I do.
No, I think
This
so.
is-
I think so too. Yeah.
Okay, just leave it right there for now.
Thank you.
Trust.
Mm,
Yeah, but it's helpful for me to hear that from outside of myself.
Yeah,
Thank you.
mm,
I believe you and your community.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good.
yeah, I echo that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to move into a breakout group. I'm really happy we have time to do that today. And what I'd like you to address, and we'll do groups of 3. And again, some of you, I don't know how many we are on the webinar. Some of you may wind up partnered with me, and we'll work it. But I will automatically put you in the breakout groups in just a moment. The question I would like you to address is just think of an example and share it with your partners of how you hold the high ground, how you live the 5 R's, and how does that feel? So we're keeping it really personal still, to the bitter end of our session tonight, and it'll get a little more impersonal starting in our next session. But how do you hold the high ground? How do you live the 5 R's? How does it feel when you do that? And time permitting, give some reflection to what limits you in holding the high ground. Just not a laundry list. Be sure you don't shame yourself. That wouldn't be appropriate here. But just think, this is part of our radical honesty, right? How do I live it? How do I not do it? Welcome back. Please make sure you are muted unless you are going to speak. Yeah, great. So I want to take just a couple minutes for any final reflections before we end our session. Anything feel burning? Anybody wants to share? I would like to share something that I thought about. I think I heard myself say something about a healthy skepticism, and I would like to retract that. I don't think that's the right attitude. I think there's something so beautiful about even just trying to make this happen. Just even planting these seeds. One of the things we'll talk about in a session to come is the importance of non-attachment to outcome. And we know systems don't change easily. We know people don't change easily. But just the invitation to engage in something like this that is so sane and so healing, so paradigm shifting, that's the energy we want to bring to this. Yes, we want to be honest about whether or not people are ready for it, whether they're up to it. But whether we're successful or not, just planting these seeds will have ripple effects. So that's what I wanted to say. Anybody else before we move to our close? Okay, we're all anxious to go finish our dinner. So some of the foundations that are alive for me around this particular session that I will add to our running list. Humanity's survival depends on our ability to slow down, that first quote. Personal responsibility above all else. When in doubt, when challenged, the healing justice worldview is your ground. And these are the resources flowing out of this session. I will send an email with the links, and this will all be in the Google Doc. The bearing witness practice is an audio recording of a practice of mine. The two things on the bottom are two articles of mine that I think fit pretty well. And a final thought from Hafiz. Just sit there. Don't do anything. Just rest. For this separation from God, from love, is the hardest work in the world. Thank you for being here. Good night. Y'all are really great. I want you to know that.
Good night. Thank you, Scott.
I have a lot of hope. May there be
Thank
healing.
you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Take
I'll
care.
send the link to the
Bye-bye.
recording.
Love
Good night.
breakout sessions.
Good night.
Right.
Good night.
Thanks,
Thank
Scott.
you, everybody.
Good night.
Thank
Remember the
you.
Google Doc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.